All right, guys, welcome to the Addiction Mindset Recovery Coaching YouTube channel. I'm here today with Dr. Trish Leigh, who is the author of the book, Mind Over Explicit Matter, if you can see that right there. And today we're going to be having a detailed conversation about pornography addiction. First, I just want to give you a proper introduction, Dr. Leigh. So Dr. Trish Leigh is a world-renowned educator, speaker, and practitioner who holds professional certification as a top-tier brain health, neurofeedback, and sex addiction recovery coach. In her book, Mind Over Explicit Matter, Dr. Leigh offers a step-by-step program to end porn addiction and heal the brain, integrating the latest neuroscientific research with easy-to-use techniques and strategies to conquer habits and change lives. And for those of you that enjoy today's video, please be sure to check the links in the video description and pinned comment to learn more about Dr. Leigh's social channels and pick up a copy of her latest book. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm super psyched. Let's dive in. Let's go deep and wide.
Let's go for it. So, Dr. Leigh, in your videos
sure.
and in your book, you discuss 3 common causes of pornography addiction. Would you mind breaking down each of these potential causes that could lead someone to struggle with this?
Absolutely. And of course, I want to preface it by saying that, a lot of what I'm going to share right now will be simplified. This is really a very complex issue. Addiction in and of itself is complex. But honestly, I think porn addiction is even more complex. So just to, throw that out there. But I categorize it into 3 different categories. One being a classic porn addiction that affects usually people above 50 or so. That's kind of old school. You first found porn magazines, but high-speed internet porn wasn't available yet. So it's a dopamine dependency, which all of porn addiction is, but the onset was slower and it was more trauma driven. So what tended to happen back then was there was more trauma and dysfunction in families and households. And, the way I think about dysfunction is it's in every family. It's just a matter of flavor and level, but it's kind of driven more by trauma, and we can dive back into that. Then we have more contemporary porn addiction, which honestly I think is so much more dangerous. So when high-speed internet pornography came along and continued to evolve, now in the click of a button, there is a dopamine deluge, a flood of dopamine available to young brains. So what is happening across the board these days is young people, we know it's down to the ages of 8, 9, 10. 10 people have been exposed and are already starting to water those seeds of addiction. So it's more driven by the dopamine dependency and the habits and the fact that the dopamine's at much higher levels. Then, of course, there's your mixed type where even people who are older, or maybe people who weren't exposed to porn when they were young, but then, found social media. Social media is hypersexualized. People are wrapped up in that, and it's not porn proper, but it's explicit matter, which is why, I like that title. It covers kind of everything that's happening. So it's mixed where you found something lower level, but then that leads to escalation into higher level dopamine and intensity in terms of sexual content that's being consumed.
I could say, especially in today's world with the rise of websites like OnlyFans and things like that, do you think that further complicates things? And I only say this because, I'm on social media a lot. I follow influencers who have OnlyFans accounts. Not for pornography reasons, for different reasons, but
That's what they all say.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm only kidding.
People can watch my history on my channel. They know what I'm all about.
I'm only kidding.
But one of the things that I think when I see that is, now not only are you seeing the person who is, making these adult content videos or pornographic videos, but you're also kind of like getting to know them on a quote unquote, what feels like a deeper level. Oh, here's this person with their family. Here they are going out. Do you think that adds another element into
yeah,
this?
you nailed it. Absolutely. You nailed it. And it's distorted intimacy, but it's linked to very high levels of dopamine. And, basically the worse it takes hold of a person's brain, they will go back to that influencer or those scenes or scenarios. For some people, it can be a particular influencer. For others, it can be the thing that they're consuming, the act, the scene, whatever it might be. So influencers are part of that, but it really distorts the viewpoint of a person. So they do begin to connect with that thing at a much higher level. And that is happening with influencers, which now on Netflix, there's a few different documentaries of, influencers gone wrong. And it's a two-way street. It's dopamine from external validation, all the likes, which actually can be financial gain for people also when they are OnlyFans or influencers. Then it's also, being part of that tribe for the person who is doing the liking or who is supporting that person. It's distorting what used to be, from an evolutionary sense, instinctual and a survival trait. Now it's taking it and it's creating, kind of havoc in a person's brain and in their life.
I want to come back to that evolutionary point. So I'm going to make a little note of that, but I want to ask another question before I dive into that. And that is, and this kind of brings me to the question of evolution. One of the things I always think about when I'm talking to people who might be struggling with porn addiction or even my own history with it, I would always think, well, isn't this kind of normal? Like, I'm a young male, I'm in my 20s, I got testosterone, like I got a phone right here and I have access to all the porn in the world. Isn't it like human nature to get involved in this stuff? Or no, has the way it's been, kind of played out with technology, has that distorted the regular evolution of, I guess I'll say, sexual contact that we used to have?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, I'm the messenger, so don't shoot the messenger because there's a lot of science on this, but I do believe it myself also. And I mean, and honestly, you actually really kind of said the answer in the question is that, if you are linked to your phone for dopamine, you actually take away from your ability to be able to have a sexual relationship and a sexually satisfying relationship with a partner. Sex in and of itself is to keep the species going, which you and your phone in your hand have no hope of doing. So it actually takes away from your ability. We also know from the science that there is decreased relationship satisfaction. There's decreased self body image. So people who consume porn actually look on their own body worse. Men, for one of the first times in history, have body image issues because they're watching porn performers that they can't compare to. Then they're watching female porn performers who their partners can't compare to. So now they look at their human partner who isn't being accentuated and they're like, you don't do it for me anymore. And then the real kicker is erectile dysfunction. It's through the roof in young men because of the desensitization in the reward center and the dopamine receptors. So because of porn consumption at very high levels of dopamine, now young men, particularly, it's happening to women too, but men mostly, can't perform with their partner. And you know what that does? Throws them right back into the screen.
Absolutely. And you answered my question beautifully about evolution. So this is not just like an evolutionary thing in the way the future was should have gone. Okay. Now,
Yeah, and I tell people all the time, go have as much sex as you want. I'm totally pro sex. So like go, get your groove on with a partner, enjoy yourself, get healthy levels of dopamine, which are lower than what you find in the screen. It's called the happiness trifecta. You get dopamine for pleasure at healthy levels, not, through the roof. You get oxytocin for connection and serotonin for happiness and joy. So that's like a 5-course meal that's delicious, but doesn't hit the same as a huge piece of chocolate cake.
absolutely. And this brings me right into it. So you're mentioning dopamine, oxytocin. How does pornography impact the brain? And what are some of the side effects of porn on the brain? And what are some of these terms? Dopamine, oxytocin. How does this all work?
Yep. So, okay. So I've thrown out those terms. Those are neurochemicals. They're neurotransmitters. But I actually would like to bring us back one step because the work that I do, I use something called QEEG brain mapping that looks at the electrical energy patterns in a person's brain. And I've tried to make it simple to describe this, but the way I talk about it is 2 different brain patterns. One I call strained brain. That's a brain that's wired and tired. So you feel stressed out, but exhausted and overwhelmed at the same time. That brain pattern begs you, gives you urges and cravings for porn to self soothe. The cruel joke of it is that porn causes that brain pattern. It's stressing your brain out, but then it's leading you to what's called a negative feedback loop in terms of neuroscience. That strained brain, wired and tired, you feel the need to self soothe. What comes along with that in terms of symptoms in the mind and the body is anxiety, hypervigilance. You're kind of in a fight or flight state. You're always busy. Your mind's going. You can't sleep. You also may have erectile dysfunction or what I call SAD, sexual arousal dysfunction, because your brain's always on. It can't turn off. The second pattern I call drain brain. This usually happens after you've been in strain brain for a while and you keep hitting the easy button of porn. Drain brain is you're stuck in neutral. Now you feel depressed, unmotivated, anhedonia, no feeling of pleasure at all. You've hit that button too many times. Now your brain is drowned out in dopamine. And I think the interesting part of this is that I've been using QEEG brain mapping for a very long time. I've seen thousands of brains that are addicted to porn. They basically always have one or the other brain pattern, and some unlucky souls have both of them.
Does how the person got into porn, if we go back to the three stages of, the three stages of getting into pornography that you mentioned, does that show any prediction as to what brain pattern they may have or not necessarily?
Well, actually, I'm studying that right now. I think I'm probably the only person on earth who bought herself a data scientist to work with for Christmas last year. So I'm in the midst of doing a study to try to connect some dots on that. Because as far as I can tell anecdotally, the variables, and I always tell people there's so many variables in this, but it's intensity and frequency and basically like the continual or continuous nature of porn consumption. So a person who goes back a lot, edging is one thing that is a very high risk factor behavior. What that means is you keep going back to porn, but without orgasm. So you're basically allowing your brain to be flooded, and remain in that flooded state. That's a very high risk factor. So I would say just continually going back at very high levels, those are the people who have the most drain brain.
Okay, and from that makes me wonder too. So, would you say that pornography addiction, and maybe we could say this for other substances as well, would you say there is kind of like a spectrum to it? Like some cases more extreme, some cases not as extreme, and do those more extreme cases in the brain look different than the less extreme cases in the brain?
Absolutely. It
Okay.
exists on a continuum, and I talk about that all the time. And again, I've seen thousands of brain maps. So, and actually, people who hear me talk and then they schedule a brain map, they don't tell me they know exactly what I'm going to tell them about their brain map. Because if it's like, I call it a brain on fire, if it's lit up dark red, that means the brain is dysregulated at 3+ levels. And if you know anything about the bell curve or standard deviations, that means those areas have 99.9% dysfunction. So people will come into the meeting and they'll be like, I'll be halfway through the meeting and they already know everything that I'm going to say. But then there's brain maps that are orange or yellow or lime green. Those are 1, 2, 2.5. So the way I talk about it is, it's systematic, but it's also individualized. And it's kind of like fingerprints, where there are patterns, but then, yeah, they exist from 1 to 10.
Okay. Now, that leads me into another question about this. So, when it comes to pornography, do you ever see that? And I'm going to go ahead and venture the answer is yes. But do you ever see that combined with other substance use disorders? So, cannabis consumption, alcohol consumption, cocaine consumption. And if so, does that complicate things more or not necessarily?
It does. And so, yeah, of course, I see that a lot. And what I was going to say is that how it complicates it is if it's intertwined, which it's not always intertwined, but for many people, especially depressants. So most of the substances that you mentioned are depressing the system. They're kind of bringing it down. Cocaine's the only one that I remember that is more of a, upper and revs the system up. So when it comes to depressants, those are the great disinhibitors is what I call them, because they're basically like if it's linked to your porn use, the minute you begin to consume those substances, you're unlocking the gate. So for people who are trying to stay away from porn, you have a drink and then you have a little hit of marijuana. Then you start gaming. It doesn't even have to be substances. Gaming falls into this category too. And I'm sure, a lot of your listeners will relate to this. You pour a cocktail, you take a little hit, you put on your game, and before you know it, the hijacker in your brain's going, I got an absolutely brilliant idea. Let's test your fortitude in porn. I know you haven't watched in, 73 days, but let's see if you're strong enough. And it's the great disinhibitors that do that.
That was a really big thing through my own experience with it, with struggling with cannabis and binge drinking and stuff. I noted that in order for me to really get away from pornography, I had to get rid of those other things first.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it just seemed to be impossible. But once I got further away from cannabis use and certainly alcohol, the frequency at which I would watch adult media content significantly decreased, even without even really trying. It just became less interesting. And I'm gonna guess too, if you're flooding your brain with cannabis or alcohol, or maybe it's different with cocaine because it's a stimulant, is that having a further impact on the dopamine receptors in the brain too?
It
then?
is.
Like, is that
it is, and that's why I'm nodding my head, because you and I are on the exact same wavelength the entire time here. Is that they call it the chaser effect. So this would be one way that you might experience the chaser effect, is that once you get the dopamine flowing, then subconsciously you look for a way to keep it going at higher levels. So that's why, one drink is like, okay, maybe I'll have some marijuana because it's going to bring you further into that numbed out dopamine induced state. And then it's like, oh, maybe I'll play my game, and the game floods your brain even more. So it's chasing down. This is the cruel thing. And I know I've used that word twice now, but about dopamine, they call it the molecule of motivation, more, and pleasure. But what they don't tell you is that it's not discerning. It will link itself to whatever you keep linking it to.
Yeah, it's our responsibility to choose what we're focusing that dopamine towards, right? So yeah, the brain can't figure out this is good dopamine or bad dopamine necessarily, from what I understand.
Yeah,
now,
it'll chase down the reward. Where you're giving your brain the reward, that's the main question.
Yeah, and then I could go into what is the reward of, pornography. Now, before I go back to that, here's another thought as well too. When it comes to pornography and other drugs, does this also apply to masturbation? And if so, how? So a lot of times when I talk to people, they'll say, okay, I'm struggling with a cannabis substance use disorder, alcohol substance use disorder. I'm struggling with pornography as well. And they'll say, but you know what? I think I'm going to get away from porn, but can I keep masturbating, or should I just go no fap altogether and not masturbate at all? Should I even be having sex with my significant other during this time?
Yeah,
Should I
those are
stop
great
everything?
questions.
So yeah, let's maybe talk about that a little bit. So
Sure.
when it comes to pornography and masturbation, is there a differentiation between the two things that needs to be
There
made?
is, but for most people, no. And I'll tell you why. Because the World Health Organization recognizes compulsive sexual behavior disorder. It's a disorder. It's recognized. The number one way that it plays itself out compulsively is compulsive porn use. What compulsive means is there's a need to go back to not feel bad. It's not a choice to do something to feel good. So that's a huge distinction. And if you've had a compulsive porn habit that's been linked to masturbation for any amount of time, but we've already identified the longer and the more intense, that linking has been happening in your brain, in the neural pathways for a very long time. So now if you say, okay, I'm going to give up porn, but I'm still going to masturbate, you can't do that because the compulsion is so linked. And what happens with porn use is it can be internalized. And one of my clients put it so aptly, and I actually wrote this quote in the book, is that you put an alcoholic, a drug addict, and him in a room, 30 days later, the other two come out clean. He comes out the same because he can just run the reels in his head. And especially if it's coupled with masturbation, then you can still fire up those dopamine receptors. You don't need a substance. You can do it with euphoric recall or fantasy that you can play in your mind after you've viewed so much porn. So the only way that you could go, okay, masturbation's fine, is if you've never had a compulsive masturbation habit, which is not a thing if you've had a compulsive porn habit.
Very interesting. And then would the same apply? So then let's take that a step further. Would the same apply to sexual relations with a significant other? So someone says, "Look, I had this problem with porn. I had this problem with masturbation. I have this problem with alcohol or cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? Can I have sex with
Mm-hmm.
my wife or not during this time?"
I say yes, and I'll tell you why. For most people, and I've worked with thousands of people, so for most people, that's why they have erectile dysfunction, because it's not the same at all. So they men who struggle with compulsive porn, they can get an erection through porn and masturbation because it is a higher level supernormal stimulus of dopamine. Sex with their partner is not. And especially the more emotionally healthy your partner is and won't, engage in porn influenced acts that or scenarios that you might want to, it's going to be lower levels of dopamine. Think happiness trifecta.
Yep.
Very different. So if your sexual relationship is actually one that is about connection and it's fun and it's pleasurable, but it's also about, being with that person and enjoying that aspect of love and intimacy, they're two very different levels of dopamine. And that's why people struggle with erectile dysfunction, because their brain is used to level 15 dopamine on a scale of 1 to 10. And I always joke that your partner on a good day is an 8.
Yep.
And if she knows you have a porn habit, she's a 3. So,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge issue. So that brings me into another thing too, which is the question of, can the brain heal and recover? And that's definitely something that I want to talk about, the timelines of healing and the timelines of recovery and kind of what porn recovery looks like. But before I do that, I do have another thought that popped into my mind while we were talking. This was kind of before, or this came after my time with regard to pornography addiction. But nowadays you have websites that are linked to financial components too, right? So you can pay someone on a fans based website to do something. Does that to me almost, it's not gambling, but that to me almost seems like it's almost like it's playing into online gambling too. Does that just further this whole mess
It
that we
does.
have?
It does. But honestly, I think of it a little differently. Actually, I think that social media plays into the gambling aspect with its intermittent reward cycle. So, like depending upon what you're looking for. But when it comes to answer your question about cams and things like that, that really is a person looking for intimacy in a distorted way. And I'll tell you an interesting thing about my own professional journey is with working with so many people, I know all the things that nobody else knows about how deep this goes. And honestly, it stirs me deep down to help people. So when people go to cam girls, they're actually there to be validated in, like, if it's trauma based, they want to hear the thing they never heard. It's actually more about distorted connection that they're not able to get in their life. And the more they do it, the more dysfunctional their brain becomes. This is like the plea to people, is that the more you go there, you're not going to a partner and saying, when I was young, I was short. And this is just one example, and it's not about long and short
Of course.
height, if you know what I mean. But when they go to a cam person, they'll be like, I need to hear that I'm tall. I'm tall and strong. That's why they go there. They want to hear the things. They want someone to personally validate them. And it is through sexual ways, because it gets, distorted is really the best way to talk about it.
Very interesting. So it brings me to another question. So say you're working with someone and they say, no, but I can't, and I can't is a strong word, is what I always say, but they're convinced that they can't get that validation from somewhere else. Do you see any benefit to pornography consumption or cam girls or this distorted sexual interaction for a person who may feel that they can't get it from somewhere else?
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why, is that if you're getting it there in a distorted way, your brain can never gain the clarity to go get it from the healthy sources. The thought processes that become so twisted in people's minds because of the brain dysfunction. So that what I just said does not come with judgment. Your brain becomes highly dysregulated. It makes you think in different ways, because I hear that from people, and people tell me it all the time. And my program is 4 months long. So we're not talking about an eternity here. We're talking about when you start rewiring your brain, the fog clears. One of my clients just told me this. He gave me a very long story that I won't share, but he was blown away at the things he would do with his mind that then he would do in his relationships to basically self-sabotage them. He's like, I don't know why I'm doing this. And the clearer his brain got, the less he did it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Sometimes people, when I'm talking to them, I do a lot with cannabis, and they'll say, well, they express whatever they're feeling at the moment. And I'm like, I get it. I was there once. But also, I'll just say, again, without judgment, things are delusional right now. You're not thinking straight right now. That drug is very active in your body. It's very active in your brain. So what you're saying today probably won't even make sense to you 90, 120 days from now. And you'll be looking at me the same way I'm looking at you, like, no, that doesn't make sense. No, of course not.
Yes.
So
Yes. That's my hope for people.
That's the hope. That's the goal. Now,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you said your program's 4 months, and we'll have links
Mm-hmm.
to that in the pinned comment in the video description for those who are interested. But let's
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about, you chose a 4 month timeline. What would you label as the stages of recovery from pornography, and what do some of those timelines look like for people?
Sure. So to put it in an easy way again, but not always as simple as I'm about to share, is that it's first imperative to unwire your brain. This is the first stage, unwire. I break it into unwire, rewire, and hardwire, from a neurological standpoint, but it's imperative to unwire your brain from the need for high levels of dopamine. So of course that means pivoting and staying away from wherever you're going for those high dopamine sources. That can be really difficult because your brain is dependent. We know that, basically there's a dopamine dependency at the core because of the changes in the brain performance and habits. So you have to change your habits too. So to give people, a takeaway right now is you have to find a way to stay away from the source, the unhealthy, unreality source, while you're also changing your habits to rewire your brain and the pleasure pathways back into real life sources. That can be very difficult for people because they will experience withdrawal symptoms, and it'll be very difficult to be motivated back into work, hobbies, and relationships. And if you just think about it logically, it's because when you use porn, it leaves your brain in a dopamine deficit state back in your life. There's not enough dopamine there because you're getting all of it from the screen. So you have to unwire first. And then after unwiring, or actually simultaneously, when I work with people, we're rewiring the brain back towards the optimal state. Many of the people that I work with found porn when they were 10, and brains develop until they're 28. So most people's brains have never developed into the optimal state. Think about that. That's mind blowing. So when I work with people, I help them rewire their brain back to the optimal state. And then it's essential to hardwire that in with the foundation of a lifestyle that doesn't depend on high levels of dopamine from porn.
And those are the stages of recovery.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot in each of those stages, but
Of course.
I have people create a pivot plan, and actually a pivot plan toolkit, a physical toolkit, so they can change their physical and mental space in those early days. Usually it's around 2 weeks that you might experience withdrawal symptoms. And I encourage people not to think about it as time, because the question always is how long?
Yeah.
But it really is, what are you doing? The more you do, the more you train your brain for healthy dopamine in the real world. And I encourage people to dopamine stack from real world sources. People will read online about a dopamine detox. I tell people digital dopamine detox from porn, but you might actually want to game a little more if you can, going back to the slippery slope, like get real life dopamine. And then it's about making sure you're in a job that you love, I would encourage, but at least like. Some people I work with, they'll change their job.
Yes.
You have to repair your relationship. Relationships get really funky. There's rupture in relationships when sex addiction enters in. So most of the people I work with, they double down and they repair their relationship. So now they're getting joy there. Their sex lives improve better than ever. That's the hardwiring. It's looking at all the pieces and where are there cracks? Where are there leaky buckets? Where are there holes that you can fill?
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. It's not just, oh, here's a timeline for overcoming porn and neurochemical rebalancing. It's here's the things that we now probably need to work on. Some of those things, like a career, relationship, healthy relationship, might take more time than others for some people, and
Mhm.
that's why timelines are such a slippery slope. But I still like to ask the question. That's
Yeah,
wonderful, though.
I
That
mean, it's a good idea, but I have honestly seen a few clients have changed in one instant. So when people ask me, I tell them you can do it in one instant and you can have zero relapses. I expect no relapses. If you have a relapse, maybe one or two early on, and I have a whole
Mhm.
description for that. But it's loss aversion, and there's neuroscience that shows it. The greater the loss, it'll create a brain reset. People who are going to go to jail, people whose wife goes, "I'm out of here." The minute she goes, "I'm out of here," and then the brain resets and the person goes, "Let me fix it," and they just get to work on fixing all those holes.
hmm Absolutely. Now, you brought up something in this conversation about recovery that I find interesting. So, a lot of times people look at pornography and gambling and they'll say, look, addiction aside, we're talking about physical dependence to a substance, right? So,
Mhm.
someone's physically dependent upon alcohol, someone's physically dependent upon Xanax. People will say, well, you don't get that with gambling and pornography. So, these withdrawals, they're just in your head. And I think I heard you a little bit ago say no, there is a physical change and a physical dependence that's occurring. Did I hear that
Yeah,
correctly?
and there's a lot of science to show that. Actually, I was just in the book. In the book I wrote, I wanted to make sure like every sentence had a scientific source because I don't want people to go, "There's no science for this." And the publishing company actually made me cut out a lot of the sources, which I thought was funny because they're like, "You don't need to cite that. You don't need to cite that." And I'm like, "Okay, but I will know, take it to my grave that there was a citation for every sentence." But there's two kind of foundational studies that are now over 11 years old showing that there's changes in structure and function in the brain, and primarily in the prefrontal cortex and in the reward center. So, these aren't new ideas, these are proven.
These have been around. And something
Mhm.
else that you said that jumped out to me too throughout this conversation is you said, people as young as 10 years old. And it's interesting because I'll do work in high schools for substance use prevention. And I'm usually there for cannabis, nicotine, alcohol, things like that. In fact, I go out of my way when I'm in a younger population to not deal with anything that's sexually explicit content. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, one of the conversations that comes across my desk after I get to know a person at even a young age is adult media content.
Mhm.
And I pretty much divert away from it because
Mhm.
it's not space I want to be in at that,
Mhm.
age range, but it is unbelievable. Like, and I mean, I've heard of anime pornography, pornography on Snapchat. And I can tell you too, I'll rant on Snapchat for a second here. When I give these seminars in schools to adults and I'm talking to parents or faculty, and I'll say, what do you think one of the things I'm most concerned about is? And they'll be like, nicotine or alcohol or cannabis. I'm
Mhm.
like, it's actually social media, specifically
Mhm.
Snapchat, and the visual images that are coming across a 12-year-old's eyes on her phone on
Mhm.
Snapchat. And
Mhm.
like, and I don't know if you've seen this, or I'm sure you're aware of this, it's become so distorted. Young men don't even know how to interact with young women, as in they'll have
Mhm.
two conversations on Snapchat and then the male is sending a photo of his genitalia completely unwarranted. Now this girl
Mhm.
opens it not knowing what she was going to see, and this is
Mhm.
like a massive issue that's going on at a very young age that I don't think anyone's really talking about. Is that something that you've like are, do you know
Yeah,
about all that probably?
oh yeah, I know about all that. I'm actually diving into the science on it because I'm starting to put together my next book on screen addictions. And I don't know if you know this about me. I also have 5 children. So
Okay,
I am
no.
the proud mama. My oldest is 22 and my youngest is 14. So I've had to deal with this. And I have 2 boys and 3 girls. So like I've had to deal with this from a personal level in all different ways because each one of them there's different situations that I dealt with trying to teach them. And I'm very glad to be almost through it. And I feel like I've done it very successfully, but it was not easy coming, I will tell you. And I've told some of the stories before, but I'm diving into the science for my next book on screen addictions. And the through line is actually coming from some of my life stories, is exactly what you're talking about, is that, I mean, in the studies I've already started to read, they go down to a longitudinal study that goes down to the age of 12, which, now we have longitudinal studies. They're like 20 years old, which is pretty cool, 15 years old, looking at cyberbullying going up, like all of the dysfunctional social interactions, like you're talking about, through the roof because of the interactions on social media. So, to chime into that, I have a nonprofit organization that I've founded too. It's called Porn Brain Prevention. It's not easy to get organizations to let me talk about explicit matter for kids. So I'm actually changing the name of that organization to leavethescreen.org sometime soon. So when you see that, you'll know the change is very intentional, so that I can try to get into organizations with the premise of teaching kids how to balance their screen time while planting the seeds that these interactions are not okay and they are linked to all bad things long term.
Wow, that's fantastic that someone's taking that on, because that is a monster task. So I hope that is a success for you, because
Yeah.
yes,
And
I've
people
dabbled in
donate to
it.
the nonprofit all the time. I tell people, go upstream with me because, I'm here to help people who are already struggling, but together we can go upstream. So the goal of that nonprofit is to teach parents about the dangers that they do not inherently know, and using science to do so, and then giving them ways to empower them to help them set the healthy safeguards for their kids. It's very difficult to do. One of my kids, I had to take her phone away. She went off the rails on me, and she was in a very it ended up being, it was basically, I don't even think the kid who did it knew he was doing it, but kind of grooming her via likes and hearts and stuff. With a
Yes.
lot of women he was doing it, and I ended up having to cancel her phone number. But those were difficult times for me because that doesn't come easily. But I'm like, if you can't use it in a safe and healthy way, I'm your frontal lobe, sister. I've got to make that decision for you.
Yeah, that could maybe even be another really fascinating conversation on this channel that we could have, because in my world, and you know this, the cycle that occurs. So young girl receives unwanted photo of some dude's genitalia that may or may not be a teenager, who knows.
Mhm.
She's bothered by it, doesn't talk to her parents, smokes weed all night to cope with it, wakes up exhausted. Now she's exhausted, 2 3 energy drinks the next day 'cause she's on social media all night with this guy. And then here's the cycle, and now you got a very young brain that's been exposed to pornography, cannabis, or alcohol, really high stimulants all day long because they're so stressed and so tired from everything that's
Mhm.
happening. And this just happens again and again
Yeah,
and
eating
again. And
disorders. Eating
eating,
disorders enters in, and then unfortunately, you know what else enters in? We could be here all day, by the way. Estrangement from parents. That's on the rise because of social media. So what happens is parents starts to see this, and the parents like, this is not okay, but there's so much dysfunction happening in that child's undeveloped brain that they're like, I'm not listening to you. I'm 18. That
absolutely.
I've talked to so many families that, they're like, my kids won't talk to me. And this is a trend happening that's being fueled by some influencers on social media talking about intergenerational trauma, but not
Yes.
giving kids the tools to go, intergenerational trauma is the key to understanding your parents. And if your parents are doing the work to become better, you become empowered to break that and become better yourself, not get sucked into the negative feedback loop. And if I could just say one more thing,
Please.
talking about the solution, right? What's the solution to all this? Neuroplasticity. I remember when I was young being at a conference where the presenter said neuroplasticity ends at the age of 28 when brains develop. I even remember then thinking, this can't be true. Like, this does not compute. Well, we now know from just a ton of science that brains are neuroplastic across the entire lifetime. What that means is you can mold it like Play-Doh, but Play-Doh is a lump that sits there and it will only be shaped into what you shape it into. So right now, depending upon your habits, you're shaping it in the direction of the life that you're getting. This is a message I want people to know. You are the creator of your existence. You just forget you're molding the Play-Doh. You forget that, but it's moldable. You can unmold it from the direction that you're going in right now, and you can mold it back to purpose and connection with your family, to healing all the wounds and the trauma, to getting healthier interactional styles. Like neuroplasticity can be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending how you're using it. I want you to use it as your best friend.
And I think that's so much of what appeals to me about your social channels and your message is that you do have the power to change. You might be lacking the understanding on how, and that can be provided, right? A person can be taught, they can be shown tips, tricks, ways, you can dive into that. But at the end of the day, you have the power to choose the next path. And I think that's what I love about your content. So yes, I
Yeah,
hope
thanks.
people hear that. And that leads me to my last question, which I'll bring it back to porn and then we'll wrap it up, is
Sure.
so what do you make of, and this may be controversial, but what's your opinion on like no fap groups and support groups and things like that? Because you have so many different strong opinions on how things should be managed. Do you think it's
Mhm.
beneficial? Do you think it's not beneficial? Do you think it's a case by case scenario?
I think it's a case by case scenario because, I liken these things to a hairstylist. Some hairstylists can give you the best haircut in 5 minutes. Others can give you a terrible haircut in an hour. Like, what I mean by that is some people get all gung ho for moral on which, of course I
Sure.
think there's a moral piece to this, but it's really about like it's a choice. A no fap lifestyle is a choice. And it goes back to the chocolate cake if we want to bring it back there. You know, when kids are young, they eat a lot of chocolate cake because that sugar rush is amazing and it makes you feel good. And of course, cake is delicious. But at a certain point, when you grow up and you realize, okay, chocolate cake is the thing that's making me gain weight. It's giving me acne. Like that's the choice that is to be made. So the groups that really strongly anchor into the choice aspect as a healthier lifestyle, I love that because that empowers people. Anything that has a shaming component, anything that is a do or don't, I try to stay
Mhm.
away from these absolute extremes and try to meet people where they are to be able to make a healthier choice in the right direction. And again, it goes back to the neuroscience because we are trying to create feedback loops. And if a person is stuck in a negative feedback loop, it's your proverbial downward spiral. Nobody wants to be there. So when you start moving in the right direction, and if you find a group that empowers you to do that, now you're on your way on an upward spiral. And, that's what it's about.
That makes complete sense. For anyone who enjoyed this, I encourage you guys to check out Dr. Leigh's new book in the pinned comment. Link will be there in the video description. Dr. Leigh, do you have anything else that you'd like to share as we wrap this up? And hopefully we'll have you on again sometime.
Yeah, the only thing I want to share, which, my work is grounded in it, is that if we share, I'm sharing strategies with you, but if you can't use them, it's not because they don't work. It really means your brain is stuck. So, like, just to end on that, because people will say all the time, like, oh, that's all great, but I can't do that. It goes back to what you were saying. You don't want to say I can't. It means you need more support. It means you don't have the tools and the techniques. And I want you to understand brain dysfunction and dysregulation is at the core. So there are ways we can, unstick your brain from that and get you moving in the right direction. So don't give up hope. It's pragmatic hope that I want people to have. Make sure you're doing what you need to do to get the upward spiral going.
One of my favorite things that I heard someone say once was I was saying I couldn't do something, and they asked me, "Is it beyond the laws of physics?" And I was like, "No." And then they were like, "Well, it can be done then." It's just
Yeah.
like as you said, you're stuck, and you might need a
Yeah,
little help.
definitely. I love when someone tells me I can't. I've been told I can't so many times. And the minute somebody tells me I can't, you know what pops in my brain. Oh, yeah, watch me. You know what I mean? Like
I love
it
it.
might take me 20 years, but I will do that because challenge accepted. So, yeah, I love that. That's
Uh,
great.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leigh. Again, everyone, check
Yeah,
out
no
the links
problem.
in the pinned comment in the video description to learn more. Until next time.